Okay, so let's look at the next question from Aoiffe. And Aoiffe writes about the second lesson in the home study program, which is all about what can we change and what do we just have to accept as what is, and what's the difference and how do we learn to do that, and a little bit of clarity about that. And she writes, self-criticism. She criticizes herself. Is that something that I can change, she asks, or do I have to just accept that part of my experience? Now, I know you had other thoughts about that. Let me just share from the beginning, though. That's a really hard question for me to answer for you, because I don't have the answer as to whether something can be changed or not for you, because it's going to be specific and contextual. Now, Aoiffe, let me tell you this, though. Being self-critical, or what other people call being very harsh or judgmental or beating yourself up, that internal judgment is a direct link, is a direct indicator of not being able to receive. The more we judge, the more we're blocked to receiving. And therefore what I've seen in retreats, for example, is as soon as somebody goes into the self-spinning of the cycle of inner judgment, as soon as they take their focus away from themselves and start to open themselves up to receiving others, something magical happens. And they begin to lose the inner judgment in that moment. Does it last? No. But that doesn't matter, because it's not about sustainable effect, which means it's not about suddenly opening yourselves up to receiving and suddenly you're done and you can receive now forever and you're no longer going to be self-critical. It's about realizing that every time you want to let go of that internal judgment, connect to your heart, find out what it is that you want to receive and ask another for it and let it in. That's the art. Because when you can let it in, you'll simply be moved into a vibration where judgment will no longer exist. Because think about it this way. Judgment blocks your capacity to receive. Because as soon as you make a judgment, whether it's something about yourself or another person, as soon as you judge yourself and somebody else, you tell yourself, you know what it is that you're perceiving, and you then exclude everything else from being possible. So as soon as you say, I am bad, no longer can goodness come in. Because you've told yourself that's your reality in that moment. And what it does is, because you're no longer living in the question of who you are, you've already said who you are. I am not very good, or I am a shit, or I am not fast enough, I don't learn quick enough, and I don't speak softly enough, or I don't act well enough, whatever the enough is. As soon as we say it, can you see that we've defined who we are in that moment? And in defining it, we've basically made our universe very, very small. And there is a real safety in that, because as long as I am safe in knowing that's who I am, I don't have to let in my bigness, my goodness. And therefore there's a direct relationship between Len's law and being self-critical, because when you're self-critical, or when you're critical of others, when you make judgments, it's a great way of pushing people out and pushing the world out, pushing yourself out, and not actually having to receive. Can that be changed? Yes, because you practice letting in more love. Can you let in more love? Can that be done? Yes, absolutely. In order to do that, we need to have greater capacity to our higher mind, which means we need to move from the back of the brain to the front of the brain and learn how to move out of defense, physiology, defense emotionally, and defense energetically, and physically at the same time. So to do that, that's the practice that we do in the events, in the retreats, in the Embracing Change experience, is that we gradually help disarm that. And it takes time. There is no quick fix to this. I'll be honest with you about that. But in terms of, can your self-criticalness in that way be healed? Yes, but it's not something that needs to be fixed. See, to me, it's just a symptom of a deeper problem. You have difficulty receiving. And therefore, the opportunity that lies ahead of you is, do you want to practice letting in more? Do you want to let in more love? Do you want to let in more love with your partner? Do you want to let in more love with your friends? Do you want to let in more love with life itself? And if that's true, then make it a practice to connect to what it is that you want and let it in, moment by moment, day to day, month by month, as a spiritual practice. And if you don't find yourself being able to connect to what you want, be careful not to criticize yourself for that. In other words, we can be so sneaky with ourselves to judge every part of the experience, even when we're not doing this right. You know, suddenly the private mentorship program. What if I don't watch all the videos? What if I don't do it all the time? Oh my God, I'm not getting my value. I'm not doing enough. You know, it's crazy. Relax, relax. It's all good. The part of you that is not felt, not healed, feels unlovable, that kind of program is just something that we live with. And that it's not something you ever get rid of, because no part of us is ever got rid of. It's just transformed into a different energy, and it has a different role. In other words, your core unworthiness doesn't run your life anymore. It doesn't become the Achilles heel of all your relationships. In other words, it doesn't have the same negative effect. But does that mean that it disappears? No, it just means that it will be there in the background, waiting for you to stop the practice, stop coming from your heart. Whenever you go into a stressful time in your life when you don't feel safe, it will come in and protect you again. And it will close you down, only because it feels like you don't have the resources and energetic mastery to stay open in a very stressful, emotionally or physically or mental time in your life. And so it will come in and close that, and that's what it does. The self-criticalness has a purpose. It's keeping you away from rejection, from coming into your fullest power. It's keeping you small so you're not seen. Because you've got to remember, the ego wants to keep you small. It doesn't want to try and keep you large, because if you look at nature, how do animals protect themselves? Well, they become very still. They make sure they're not seen by their predators. So the more disguised and the more camouflaged you are, the better. And therefore, if you are doubting yourself, if you're critical of yourself, you don't give your gifts fully. You're not out there. Therefore, you're not showing up as different. And as you're not showing up as different, there's safety in that. And therefore, to that part is taking care of you. And therefore, the intention of that part is to take care of you. So you never want to get rid of that. You just want to give it a new role. You need to be in charge of that part and say, listen, this is not the time to come out. There is a time for this protection, but it isn't this time. And that can only happen when you become more frontal lobe aware, and when you are more open and you feel safe enough to be in your spontaneous emotion and to be in your vulnerability, to connect with others, to let others in, etc., etc., etc. So, yes, you can't get rid of it. It won't always be in part of your experience, but it'll always be waiting to come back into your experience in the moments you forget. And it will happen, by the way. And forgive yourself in those moments when it does happen. Now, the next part of your question, you write, I also experienced confusion trying to work out whether the intention to change my self-criticism came from need, i.e. the lack of self-worth, or from a worthy part of me. Yes, you write, I feel that I'm worthy of being kinder to myself and to stop beating myself up and accept myself as perfect as I am. At the same time, when feeling not good enough and criticizing myself at times, there is a need to change this. Well, you kind of answered that question in perfection, because what's true, Aoiffe, is that in any time during life, we're going to have moments when we feel really on top of it, in our power, on our game, in our zone, and clear, and then we're going to feel like we're totally sucked into the hijack victim of not feeling good enough, not being worthy. And you know what? Your answer to that question will change depending on what frequency you're in, because as soon as you get hijacked by a part, that's the frequency you're in. So when you said, am I wanting to change this out of a place of I feel worthy? Well, of course you are, until you're not. In other words, when you're in those moments when you're beating yourself up, you won't feel that you're worthy for it, and you'll need to push yourself to change it. Then the question is not, does that all make sense? Of course it makes sense, because you can move like on a wave of different parts of you, and when one part's in place, you're going to feel good and in your power, and you're going to think, my God, why did I ever forget this? This is so crazy. I feel like I'm going to be here forever. But of course it doesn't. Suddenly you get hijacked by that part that beats yourself up, and you go, oh my God, no help's available. Even though you know help's available. Even though you know intellectually you've been in a better place, it feels like it's never going to end. And it's like, oh my God, I'm back, I'm worse, I've gone backwards. Oh God, this isn't working. And we get into real stress about it, and we forget this is just part of the wave. So your answer to that question will change at different times, depending on where you are. The question is that's not the interesting question. For me, the interesting question is, okay, if in fact, I'm going to slip up and forget this whole process and get into my doubt, and I'm going to be self-critical, how do I find access to being more gentle with myself when I'm in that state? Because it's easy to be gentle with myself when I'm not being self-critical and I'm in my power. But how do I access compassion, gentleness? How do I get out of that place of self-criticism quicker now? And moving from that state and getting out of it, from what Ted Steiner calls the swamp onto dry land. That's really the critical question. And that is done. Not necessarily through frontal awareness, because, as I've just said, when you're in that hijacked victim place, you don't have access to the front of the brain. That's why you don't have the choice to get out of it. That's what defines a victim, is when you don't feel you have a choice. And in that moment, literally, that person doesn't, because they've disconnected from the part that even has choice. So what we need to do is be in the presence of others who can see us and feel us. And this is why I've always said, Aoiffe, that it's a community that will ultimately bring us into our heart. Because by ourselves, we can get lost, but in order to get out of the swamp onto dry land, it serves us to have another person or other people in our life who can help us there. Often the case, though, in relationships, they kind of jump in the swamp with us. Then there's two of us trying to get out. But in the case of the quickest way, now, of course, you can do it by yourself. Have you noticed that over time you eventually come onto dry land? But it can take ages. And you know what? We spend a lot of our life there and we think to ourselves, is it really necessary to be this depressed in a space that doesn't feel great for that long? No, of course not. But it will take connecting with others in order to move that. And again, I'm going full circle to what I said to you before. Your capacity to let in and actually build strong, heart-centered, connected relationships where you are vulnerable enough to ask for what it is that you want, to connect that, where you have people who can feel you, who can see you, who can actually hold you, claim you, take you, get you. That when you are in a place where you've forgotten yourself, that they haven't. And they see you. And in their seeing you, by their gentle compassion of who you are, and through them being in their hearts with you, it's like, when they're in their hearts, it's like them throwing a rope. And you can climb and you can entrain, you can match that frequency and you can be lifted by it. And then you can and then they can remind you to focus on, what are you feeling right now, Aoiffe? And what is it that you want, given what you're feeling? And that's the rope, you see. And it just needs somebody who's in their heart asking those questions. If you have somebody who's not in their heart, who's really intellectualizing those questions, who are just asking you those exact same words, oh, what are you feeling, what do you want? It won't work. They have to be in their heart in order for it to work. Anyway, a deviation from your question, and yet it's an important one.